So you probably heard that the web has been declared dead. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that declaration.
Yeah, kind of premature, but very Mark Twain-like. Yeah, no, the web is everywhere. I mean, places that you wouldn't expect, and web technologies are everywhere. Even at this point, not even on the web. You can find web technologies like HTML and CSS being used in chat clients, which are not really part of the web. I mean, they're part of the internet, obviously, not part of the web. So, and the web is, as darn near ubiquitous as any other technology I can think of.
Sure.
So, yeah, not really dead. If anything, growing and thriving and accelerating.
Right. So Apple has backed off some of its developer restrictions in recent months, recent weeks actually. Do you think that that's tamed some of the anti-Flash rhetoric that was coming out?
No, I mean, it hasn't made it worse or better. It's if anything, I think in the short term it'll probably inflame it a little bit, because then you're likely to have the, what are you complaining about? No, Apple's removed the restrictions, and then no, they haven't, and
Sure.
But it was an interesting change. It was an interesting move. I was a little bit surprised. And I'll be interested to see sort of long-term what plays out of that. If, is it going to be a case of lots of applications will be developed using those kinds of tools and then they'll show up in the App Store, or did Apple effectively kill interest from that segment of the developer market? And we'll see. It's hard to say.
Why do you think they backed off?
I am not John Gruber, so I don't have too many theories. I think at a certain point they were, they weren't going to be able to forbid all third-party applications, and so, I think they decided that it wasn't worth fighting about.
Sure.
But maybe there's some incredibly deep motivation here that either makes them look really good or really bad, depending on who you are.
Sure.
Right? So but to me, because it was always possible to create web pages for mobile devices, I personally didn't have that much of a stake in it.
Sure, as long as they don't get rid of Safari in the iOS environment.
Right, which would be a little difficult for them, I think.
Right.
It's the you can't really get rid of the web anymore from mobile devices. That would be that seems like a really bad marketing move.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to worry about whether or not it's the full web anymore. Now you have no web. Yeah,
that wouldn't go over
that's
very
not
well.
That's not going to work.
Right. So switching gears a little bit, where do you think HTML5 is going to be in 5 years? Will we just call it HTML at that point?
Wow. Part of me hopes so, and part of me thinks that the marketing, the sort of the ad hoc marketing, sort of the community sort of consensus is such that it may be HTML5 for a very long time, or maybe it'll be HTML6 by then,
sure.
HTML7. But I think I tend to just refer to it as HTML. I only say HTML5 when I'm trying to draw a distinction between what you can do in HTML5 as opposed to what HTML4 made possible or what XHTML had available. But right now it serves as a very good sort of quote-unquote marketing term. It's both used for marketing purposes, obviously, by companies, but it's also, in talking about it within the community, it's handy to have a term. There's been some discussion as to whether or not it's an appropriate term, because a lot of people, when they say HTML5, what they really mean is HTML5 and advanced JavaScript and CSS3.
Right.
And those things are not HTML5, but buzzwords can be useful, as annoying as they are, and eventually we put them on our little buzzword bingo cards.
Sure.
But they're useful, right?
Sure.
Because Ajax popularized a technology that had existed for years, right? That had been possible for a long time, to be able to exchange bits of data with a server via HTTP in an XML format, and then do things in the browser. And a few people did it, right? It had been documented. Browser makers had talked about it. People had done stuff with it. But Jesse James Garrett coined the term Ajax, and then everyone had a term that they could use and they could promote and that people could argue about.
Sure.
Right. So
solidified it a little
I think
bit.
that's where we are now with HTML5.
So the last question I have for you, of HTML5 as you define it, which feature are you most excited about? Which do you think holds the most promise?
Honestly, local storage, because the ability to have the browser store data locally, so you can be offline. You can be on a plane and interact with your data, or you can have a completely packaged, effectively application, even though it's based on HTML and CSS and JavaScript and a local storage of data. It can act just like a native web app or a native application, in the sense of you install it and then it never has to touch the internet again, right? Mm-hmm. You can do the same thing with that. So if you have a game, it can store your high scores, or right. However far you got in the puzzle game that you're playing or whatever it is. So you can create these standalone things based on these web technologies and run them on your mobile device or your desktop, for that matter, wherever you're running it. And and if you're on a plane and you open up your laptop, it's still there, and so that it's a really sort of a low-level, almost silly thing to be geeked out about. But I think in HTML, I think that's one of the most powerful additions to the markup language. I mean, the new structures are nice, and certainly the language should continue to evolve, and I don't mean to denigrate or minimize that, but that ability, I think, to me, holds the most promise, at least in the immediate term. So,
great. Well, thanks very much for joining us.
Sure.